And I'm going to welcome everyone. We've got a small group here in Cloquet, a good group online, and folks in Duluth, Grand Rapids, St. Paul, and a couple of other locations. So I hope everyone is connected and seeing us and hearing us okay. Please use the chat pod, which you'll see at lower right, to submit any questions. I'm really glad to have everyone here. Again, I'm Eli Sagor with the Sustainable Forest Education Cooperative. This is the second to last in our 2015 webinar series. We offer this series in conjunction with the University of Minnesota Extension, and we're glad to have you all here. We're also glad to have two presenters. I hope you're seeing Ron Moen from UMD, Natural Resource Research Institute. We also have Nate Eide, the Land Commissioner from Lake County, who is going to be talking to us later. The topic today is moose and forestry. And so we're going to have, obviously, a two-part presentation. Ron is going to talk first about the biology and status of the moose population in Minnesota and some habitat-related considerations. And then we're going to shift to Nate. Then we'll do Q&A with Ron. Then we'll shift to Nate Eide, who will talk a little bit about forest management activities and a project that they have to improve moose habitat on Lake County lands. As always with these webinars, we encourage you to submit questions as you have them. Those of you here in the room can submit those to me. You can scratch them on a piece of paper or just let me know. You can talk. Our mic will not be active while Ron's presenting. Likewise for other broadcast sites. But those of you watching in your office, please use the chat pod and I will forward those questions on to Ron. So without too much more rambling, I think I'm going to hand it on to Ron to start us off. Ron Moen.
Okay, thank you. And if you can't hear me, I guess let me know. What I'll be talking about, Eli said, is kind of the status of moose in Minnesota. And what this slide shows is kind of, basically why we're seeing a problem with moose. And the details are in the rest of the slides that follow. But basically, adult mortality should be half of what it is. Calf mortality has increased too. And you put those two together, you got a declining population. Part of it is related to habitat in terms of forest disturbance and thermal protection and also climate change for the future. And so the basis, one of the important things is that there's been many scientists and managers working on this problem. We started in the 2000s, actually, before I was involved, the DNR and the tribes with a VHF project. And that kind of started to indicate there was a problem, but they couldn't get in and identify cause of death. And what's happened in the 2009-2010 on is we've gotten more details about why animals are dying and also more details about habitats that they're using. And you can see here, I think the Voyageurs National Park has had moose in Quetico and then the Grand Portage Reservation, and then also down here in the southern area is where most of the work has been gone on. And one of the things, like each of us are looking at different parts of the problem. One of the things that people in my lab are looking at, and I got a lot of graduate students, is basically a year in the life of the moose. So these are locations every 20 minutes for one moose for a year, and we've got this for several animals, so we can really see what kinds of habitats they're using. And I'm kind of going to go a little bit fast on this, give enough details, but then anytime you got questions, feel free to ask. So that's a year in the life of the moose in terms of locations. And then we're using those locations to learn different things. For example, Julianne Terry was one of the master's students on the project. She went around. We used moose locations for her to go in where moose were at in the spring, because essentially with winter ticks they fall off in the spring. lay eggs, grow up, and then they attach to moose in the fall. And so we were able to go to the locations where there were ticks, and she picked up, as you can see on the lower right, all those ticks were from one of these flannels. And then this in the lower left is a moose that actually cause of death was winter ticks. One thing that's important, I mean, they can have 50 to 80,000 ticks on them, which is a lot. They're a larger animal. There was two main things that Julianne came up with. And one is that ticks are self-sustaining on moose in the sense of if wherever the moose go in the spring to drop them off, they also revisit in the fall and cross those paths, and they will get ticks. Unless we have climate change effects, ticks will probably not limit the moose population because late springs you have low moose or low winter tick densities because they die when they're just dropped onto the snow. Another project, Tim Sir worked on snails. And many of you have probably heard of brainworm. Perilaphos strongylus tenuis is a scientific name. It's basically in snails. Snails crawl on deer pellets. They consume them somehow. One of the real questions is how moose and deer get infected, actually, because there's a 0.1% infection rate in snails. Snails are one of the things that Tim looked at was where snails are more present. Also saw a density increase over summer, but with that very low infection rate in the snails, it's hard to understand how deer are infected at about 60 to 70%. Somehow they can carry on the life cycle of this P. tenuis. P. tenuis gets in moose and it doesn't reproduce. And then a third parasite, the giant liver fluke. Trevor Venata is a student working on that. He's essentially looking, all these red dots on the map are sampling locations where he's picked up limnaeid snails. It's a similar problem to the brainworm in that with a lower infection rate in the snails, it's hard to understand how somehow moose are able to pick it up to the level that they do. So there's three different examples. There's other parasites as well that will likely come forward as as time progresses and it continues to warm up. This is kind of a summary slide. The health-related issues over here on the left, over here are kind of, this is how I break it up. We've got essentially on the left-hand side is the earlier project where they couldn't get in and identify cause of death, so there's a large number of unknowns. But health-related, they could confirm about 40%. And this is because they found articulated skeletons and other things that would indicate it was a health-related issue. Unknowns that couldn't get in. And one thing to emphasize is that this is actually the DNR research project. They're doing most of this work. Michelle Carstensen is leading it. And over on this side, on the right side, we can break these down. So 3 of the mortalities, brainworm, for example, and then there's one more that was probable. 3 winter tick mortalities. And the bottom line when you look at this is about 40 to 50% of the mortalities are health related. And, one of the questions is, can we do something about that? The other half, approximately, of the mortalities are wolf related. One of the real questions here is if you have a health compromised animal, yes, the wolves might have been the proximate or real cause of death, but ultimately it was going to die soon in the relatively near future because of health-related issues. So that's something to consider. One of my graduate students, she looked at 1,000 wolf scats collected in 3 different locations. Over here, you can see Voyageurs, northeastern Minnesota, and then the Grand Portage Indian Reservation. And the main point of this graph is that you have a change in wolf diet. So deer are most common in Voyageurs National Park, where there's relatively few moose. And then as you move over to the east, deer become less and less important, while moose are becoming more important. Fawns are a relatively low proportion of the biomass, as are moose calves. And then beaver are the alternate source. And one thing I forgot to say, but essentially we took the wolf scats, sterilized them, and then looked at the hair, random samples to identify prey species. This figure is from the survey that's done by the DNR and the tribes, and basically it shows the long-term pattern. A linear regression is fit to this line. Another way to look at this is you got relatively stable, and then you've got a sharper decline, and then possibly stabilization over the last 3 to 4 years. And that's, something with the wider confidence intervals, it's hard to say, but it does look like that pattern may be there. Calf to cow ratios are important. This is for Ontario and Minnesota. Essentially, when calves are born in May, there's about 1 calf per cow. I've got it a little bit less here, but about 1 calf per cow. By the time you get around to January, when the surveys are done, what happened in the past, you were at around 60% or so calves in the calf to cow ratio, as opposed to the recent years when you're down 30 to 35 or thereabouts. And that's what I was indicating earlier, that calf survival has been lower. So what I did, and this is something that I'm working on with others, but I've taken the lead on some population modeling. I think we don't have time really for the details, but basically accounting for what we know about reproduction and mortality from all these studies, we can start to make some predictions. And one of the important things is that the red lines here is a survey, and the green track is the actual is the model predictions. And so the main point there is that we're able to match the population relatively nicely for both the numbers of animals and also calf to cow ratios and those kind of things. But then the very important thing this does is it tells us what it will take to change the trajectory of the population. So we could have a continuing decline if we maintain that higher adult mortality and higher calf mortality. If we can increase the adult survival, or if we can increase the calf survival, we can stabilize, and we really want to increase adults and calves to start to have an increase. And what this does is it puts actual numbers on goals for changes in survival. And so the prediction that we can make from the model is increasing adult survival by 1% is the same as about 4% in calf survival. And so one of the things that I want to look at, and am looking at, I haven't gotten this done yet, but it's kind of work in progress, is as a consequence of that population model, how many moose can wolves actually be taking? Or how many are available to wolves would be a better way to put it. And so here we've got dead adults, here we've got dead calves. This is a number of animals, so it doesn't consider weight. And you can see the trend down in available biomass for the wolves. It has implications for the wolf population too. And then this is for the stable population. So that's how many moose would be available, assuming this line is followed. And so basically a much lower food supply from moose for wolves. And when we look at it in biomass, just relatively quickly, adults are a lot heavier than calves, so proportionally they're more important, but the same trend is here, declining until about 2015 and then the stabilization, which is artificial. We don't know that's going to happen, but if we were to do that, it indicates declining food supply for wolves. If we look at the future, one of the things, Grand Portage has been relatively stable. Voyagers has been relatively stable, as has Agassiz, except for 1 year when there is a very low count. And that may be where we're headed, is a lower density than we have now, but stable in Minnesota. We're working on moose deer overlap too, mainly for two reasons. One is because of the parasites that moose are picking up are from deer often. Their normal host is deer. They have a much more negative effect in moose. And then also for foraging differences, probably there isn't competition for food, but then the other thing which is not listed here is that if deer are present, they're an alternative prey for wolves and maybe artificially maintaining the wolf population higher. We did have seen some differences. The first winter, 2014, you'll probably remember that was a severe winter, and we had winter kill of some deer. This is an example of that. That's marrow. That should be white. Definitely not. No back fat at all here. And we also had wolves killing. And since then, we've only had wolves killing the deer. And we just had one shot by a hunter yesterday too, or Sunday. A little bit about habitat. Rachel Ward worked on her master's thesis looking at food availability. Christina Maley with 1854 Treaty Authority is also doing that. One of the things that we can say is we know the types of habitats that moose are using. In the wet bog marsh fen cover type in Voyageurs National Park, for example, clearly they're using it out of proportion to availability, and they're using it all times of the day. Basically, we broke it down into those 4 time periods, and also at all temperatures. So that's one of the habitats that is going to be important. What we've seen coincident with the decline, and I think this, that doesn't show up very well, but this is the 5-year running mean of days above 27 degrees Celsius or 80 degrees Fahrenheit in Ely. And these are the months down here, different months, July, August, June, September, and this is the whole summer. It's pretty clear that it's been warmer. And so this moose, for example, looks hot now. Come on. Skipped this. Sorry about this. It's doing setting up an event center and taking control. Okay, back on track maybe. Okay, and this is an animal. Basically, it's a thermal image, and basically it shows how hot moose can get in the sun. One of the things that they do is would they choose where to bed? A wet substrate or in the open, depending on conditions. What this figure shows essentially respiration rate. Moose don't sweat, so they maintain a constant respiration rate until about 63, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and then they start increasing, and they're panting up here anyway to lose heat. They also conduct heat to the ground. And that is, we used again the GPS locations. They selected higher substrate or basically soil water content areas on the warmer days. And that's what's shown here, warmer temperatures and higher water content. During the nighttime, they'll be bedding in the open. I've got one slide for that. we're trying to develop a way to predict this across an entire landscape. This is a Kabetogama Peninsula. These areas here are much hotter because of the vegetation. And this darker green area, for example, is where we'd expect, and we have seen this with the GPS locations, moose to be in hotter temperatures. One of the more recent things we're working on is looking at forest structure with LiDAR with the flights that we're flowing statewide. And this is just a panel showing what you can do with that. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. What we're using it for is to identify bed sites that moose are using. So this is, on the left, this is a 3D representation. Above it is the actual dots. This is a type of forest that they would be using during the daytime, and they'd have that wet substrate like that one picture I had. And then over here, this is the type that they would be using in the nighttime when they don't have solar insulation. And that was, I mean, I could say a lot more, but I thought that that's the basics for the presentation. And then if there's questions or if we want to just go right to Nate. And I don't know if I lose control of the microphone or what.
Ron, this is Eli. Your mic should remain active. You don't need to turn your mic off or anything. We do have a few questions that have come in through the chat pod. I'm going to handle those first, and then we'll see if we have local questions here in Cloquet. First, this is maybe a two-part question. If winter ticks won't limit moose populations, then how come we're finding moose killed by winter ticks? And then also, part two is kind of, could fire suppression be playing a role in the buildup of winter tick and other parasites?
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, the first one is actually an easier question to answer. So the reason why I don't think the winter ticks will actually limit the moose population is if you look at what's happened here in Minnesota, we had an outbreak in 1991, and that was when we had a decline in the population and it recovered. And then during those years, like 2000s to 2010, 2012, we really didn't have, we had some moose dying of winter ticks, but at the population level, it's not important. It's not going to decrease the population. The one caveat when I say something like that is that it has to be, if we have continuing early springs with lots of winter ticks, then it can be important. That's something that is actually happening out in northeastern U.S. in Maine and New Hampshire. We had the 1 year with winter tick deaths, and then after that, and that was that very early spring, after that we haven't had winter tick deaths on collared moose, and the we being all of the projects that are going on here in Minnesota. The fire suppression question, one of the issues there is the scale of the fire. Unfortunately, Julianne did not get up into the Pagami Creek fires. I think that one of the things that will happen, because there's going to be patchy areas nearby that aren't burned, is that moose are going to be going out and dropping ticks in the burned areas. So the ticks that are present, like say in a summer burn, yes, they would die, but then the next spring, moose would be walking in there in dropping ticks, and it would actually be better for the ticks because the snow would disappear quicker. Okay. Is that good?
Ron, did you hear? hear those questions?
No, sorry. I only heard the...
All right, probably my bad. So quickly, I think you mentioned that a moose was shot by a hunter recently. Was that in fact a moose, or were you referring to a deer? That was the first
no,
question.
actually that was a deer.
Do bear attack?
That was a deer, sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me, Ron?
I actually can't, but I think I want to clarify when we actually had a deer shot by a hunter, not a moose. And that was this Sunday, the last day of deer season.
Okay.
And then I think you had a question about bears.
Yes, that's right. Do bear attack moose calves?
Calves. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, that's bears will attack moose calves, yes, and they're essentially the best local answer that we have on that is a project that's being led by Glenn Delgedis of the DNR, and Bill Seaverud is a graduate student on that. The cause of death of calves was 70% of it was wolves, about 10% of it was bears, and I'm pretty close on those numbers. This is their project, so I'm kind of going by memory. So yes, bears will take a few, but they're not at the density right now where it seems to be as important as wolves here in Minnesota.
All right, I'm hoping you can hear me right now.
Yeah, I can.
Next question is, the moose population in Connecticut has increased over the last 15 years, which doesn't seem to support the idea that climate change is hindering moose survival. Have there been studies to look at actual populations in different climates?
Actually, that's a very good question, and it's a slide that I deleted. The short answer is there are populations that have increased, like Connecticut and Massachusetts, and out in North Dakota, they're actually crossing the Missouri River. And that's why it's not just heat. The consistent thing that's present in those populations that I see, one is that they're low density. Two is that the natural predators are not present. So that's one stressor that's being released. And then three, they're moving into an area where moose have not been, at least in recent past. But to me, probably most important on that is the fact that their natural predator set is not present.
Thanks, Ron. I have one more question from Ely. Any questions here locally that I should pass along? All right. Last question that we're going to take at this point. After this response, we'll go to Nate and have. I want to make sure Nate has enough time. Quick one from Vermilion. How many moose are collared throughout the state of Minnesota, Ron?
Oh boy. Let's see. The goal of over time, there's probably been about 500 or 600. We should actually have this number on record. There was about 120 on that VHF project. And then on my projects, there were about 70 or so, and that would include, I was part of the Grand Portage and Voyagers, and then the DNR GPS collar project. Their goal is to maintain 100 animals. It was until the recent stopping of moose collaring. So right now there's probably about 120 to 130 moose on the air in Minnesota.
Okay, thanks, Ron. We do have a couple of other questions coming in. I think I am going to transition us, though, to Nate as our next presenter, and we'll come back and we'll have an open Q&A for both of our presenters at the end of the session. So, Ron, thank you very much, and please do stay on the line. You can you can turn off your mic until later on using the button on your screen if you want. And at this point, have you made Nate presenter?
Okay.
All right, Julie's going to make Nate presenter, and then Nate, if you have a chance to upload that video one more time, you can go ahead and do that. As I said before, the second presenter that we've got today is the Land Commissioner for Lake County. Many of you know Nate Eide. Nate is working with Ron on a project that he'll be discussing to act on some of the research that Ron and others have done related to moose habitat and to put that into practice on the ground. Nate, I hope we've got everything connected here. You're on. Oh, you'll need to click back to your first slide.
Looks good. Okay. Like Eli said, my name is Nate Eide. I'm the Land Commissioner for Lake County. I'm sitting here in my office.
Nate, we're not hearing you.
You're not hearing me. How about now? Nope. All right.
Yeah, I think we've got you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. All righty. I'll start over again. This is great that I can sit in my office and do this. Hopefully technology works. Let me know if you can't hear me. So like Eli said, my name is Nate. I'm Land Commissioner for Lake County, Minnesota. I've been Land Commissioner for about 3 years, and this has been one of my favorite projects. I started off my college career wanting to be a wildlife biologist. That didn't work out, so here I am helping wildlife in a somewhat different way, and it's been great. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is a little bit about what Lake County has done for some moose habitat. I'm going to give you how it got there, what we did, and a few pictures, quite a few pictures, and then just a little bit of lessons learned. Nothing very technical, but just maybe it'll give you some ideas of what you can do or more questions to ask. So first of all of our projects have been funded through the Sard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council grant. It is through the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association. They are the ones who got the grant, and they're administrating the grant. There's two phases. The first one is roughly $1 million. The second one's $2 million. So it's a big deal. It's not just Lake County Forestry. There's Forest Service, DNR, and Nature Conservancy. And the main thing is to do some things for moose as far as habitat, shearing, planting, burns, etc., etc. The numbers look so big, it's because of the burns. The burns, Forest Service burns are fairly expensive. This is a map of where all the projects are. For example, the green dots are where Lake County or St. Louis County are doing projects. The black outlines are the ones that have been completed to date or have been worked on. I guess they're not completed. The blue dots are Forest Service, so they're all across the arrowhead of Minnesota. You can kind of see the red outline is where they consider the moose habitat range to be. So that's where we're working. So when we're doing all these projects, these are some kind of the things that we think about, and then they're all kind of guided by the Moose Habitat Collaborative. That is the DNR 1854 Treaty Authority, University of Minnesota, NRRI, Forest Service, Nature Conservancy, St. Louis County, and the Minnesota Deer Hunters. And a bunch of the smart folks from those groups got together and kind of came up with what is moose habitat. And as I was going through this last night with my little 5-year-old, he wanted to know what's habitat. So I said, well, there's kind of 4 different things that we talk about for habitat, and that's what we'll kind of talk about today is food, in this case, browse for moose, water. As Ron mentioned, the wetter areas are somewhat important for moose as far as thermal regulation. Cover, which is thermal cover. Again, heat's not very good for moose. And then the cover also provides areas for calving and hiding out from predators. And then the kind of the last element of habitat is space, and I think we have plenty of land, but is it the right kind? I think we'll find out. So these are some of the goals that the collaborative came up with, and these are what guided our operations as we planned what we would do on Lake County land. So they're looking for a mixed conifer and deciduous forest type. If we're going to do any planting, that should be planting, not planed. There should be roughly 400 conifer trees planted per acre. That's less than we normally do. If 50% of the site is left to regenerate naturally, then the other 50% can be planted at a higher rate. So again, you kind of get that mixed conifer deciduous mosaic type of landscape. We're looking for that mosaic or clumped planting. It provides lots of benefits for the moose. And then when we're thinking about species, we want to think about white cedar, jack pine, or white pine mixed in with our traditional heavy spruce and Norway pine plantings. Also, when we are winter shearing or mowing, we should leave pockets of young trees and mature trees. This provides kind of that structure. If we're going to release the plantings, hand release with brush saw is probably the preferred method, or spot herbicide. The goal is to keep some of that brush and the aspen hardwood regeneration that's coming back with the plantation. So short term, and these are kind of the two main points here of what we do. Short term, we're increasing disturbance and regeneration, mainly for the browse. And then in long term, we'll have that thermal cover. So once those trees grow up to provide cover, then that'll be an added benefit in the future. So it's kind of a short term, long term benefit. So here's what we did. We did a winter shear on roughly 900 acres last winter. This was mainly in an area that we had acquired roughly 10 years ago. We call it the Claire Nelson Forest. It's I'll show you on a map, but it's up north of Finland, Minnesota. The areas that we picked probably had been logged 30 to 40 years ago. They were scattered balsam, fir, and birch, roughly 3 to 4 cords per acre. A few of these stands we had tried to sell at auction, and I think one of them sold, and it ended up coming back to us. The balsam market at the time was pretty poor, and it just wasn't enough for a logger to make it worth it going in there. So we did our best to try to make some money off of it. It didn't pan out like we thought it would. So we decided that this would be the best, one of the best places to get something done and to get it back into a merchantable forest. So it also had very overmature brush. We call it man-eating brush. It was hard to walk through. There's some moose browse in there, but probably not enough moose in there to keep it down to where enough of it was viable for food. Mainly hazel, mountain maple, alder, and willow. Like I said, it was unmarketable, either to low volume, too remote, or winter access. So just very productive land. It had been logged 30 to 40 years ago, but now not the best for forestry. So in short-term benefit for moose is we'll get it sheared by a winter shearing. We kind of came up with a term of the kind of shearing that we did. It's not your typical come and shear it after a timber sale. We called it the dirty shear. So it was mainly heavy brush, smaller trees, less than 5-inch DBH is what we were after. And then within the areas that we wanted sheared, 80% of the sheared area should be slash and brush free, and 70% of the total area should be sheared. So of the area that they sheared, we wanted 80% of it fairly clear, but we weren't after the whole entire area to be slicked off. We wanted reserve islands of trees, mature trees, some regenerating trees, and again, that just provides that structure and kind of gives the suite of habitat that moose are looking for. And then the shear waste needed to be pushed into islands or the edges of trees. It turned out to cost about $125 an acre. I think the contractor probably wished he would have bid more. It was different than he was used to, and probably any winter shear operator. So we'll see what it comes into this year. So then after the shearing, we planted it this spring. It turned out to be an average of 450 trees per acre. Some areas were higher than that. Some areas weren't planted at all. And some sites we didn't even plant, and that's going to be kind of our dedicated browse sites. The species we were after are spruce, pine, oak, willow, yellow birch, and cedar. The main species was spruce. It does the best. The least amount of problems. We don't have to worry about browse. Cedar was planted in patches, and we used a kind of a cone mesh system to protect it from browse. You'll see oak and yellow birch in there. That's kind of our climate adaptive management approach. Well, there is a fair amount of yellow birch out there, but and a little bit of oak, but not much. And we're hoping to increase that with the chance that climate continues to stay the same. And then the pine that we planted, they're scattered enough and low enough deer density in the area that we shouldn't have to worry about bud capping or protecting the pine. With recent lower deer numbers, I don't think we'll have to worry, and especially this area that's never been a traditional deer area, especially in wintertime. So if you can see there's a red square, yellow outline, kind of that's our main focus of what we did. If you were to look at deer density or moose density, this is one of the highest areas in the arrowhead. So it made a lot of sense to focus our efforts where there are moose already. And if you can see green dots other places as well, the thinking there is that there's no moose there, or fewer moose, so maybe we can help there as well. So now there's some pictures. This is the brush, and you can see the cat in there coming through with his KG blade. I'll show you a picture of the KG blade here in a little bit, but you can see the brush is pretty thick, and then you can see the kind of taller trees left in there. And there's another, taller brush with scattered conifer and birch. So there's the KG blade. We didn't require any sort of blade on this. This just happened to be what the contractor had. We decided to give it a try. It worked okay. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's what it looks like. It's big. Here's a video. We're going to see if this works. The magic of technology. So here you can kind of get a feel for what it's like. We had to do a lot of backing up, going forward to get around the taller trees. It wasn't easy. You can kind of see him rolling it off onto the side there. You get up to the tree here and back up. I was amazed at how they kept up with where they had been and where they hadn't been. They were constantly going in circles. All right. All right, so here, this is kind of what it looked like. Afterwards, you can kind of see where they had pushed up into the sides there. You can see the merchantable or the mature trees left in islands, the birch, the conifer. Another example of what that looks like. This is a summer shot of a similar area. You can kind of see we did an island of slash there, maybe where the slash got a little bit too thick, so we had to push it up into an island. Another picture there. So you can see the brush. It did okay. It's definitely a dirtier shear than what we're used to, but for the moose, that's okay, and for our planting, I think it's going to work. There's our cone and mesh. That is what we're using around the cedar. We tried to concentrate the cedar in areas that were wetter, obviously, and closer to a road. We're going to have to come back and keep an eye on these cones and mesh. I believe they eventually biodegrade in the sun, so we don't have to remove them, but we'll keep an eye on it. It's kind of something that we're trying. And again, there's some meshed cedar in there. You can kind of see what it looks like. There's islands of mature trees, the brush piled up against the sides. So what we learned, the KG blade, it worked, but it wasn't the greatest. The thing is really long. It's like 16 feet long, and on even ground, it didn't want to get to the bottom or to the soil or to get close enough to shear it off. So I don't know if we tried again. I don't think the contractor was very happy with it as well. So like I said, it worked, but it could have been a little bit better with maybe a straight shear blade. When we planted it, we pre-mixed the seedlings. We had, as you can see, we had a fairly diverse mix of seedlings, and mixing the seedlings in the box at the nursery was awesome. That's the way to go. So if you're going to try that, I would definitely recommend that. And then it seems like moose like it. We see moose in there. We see tracks. So anecdotally, it seems like it works, and I guess Ron would be able to answer that more definitively. The next step, also funded by this grant, is brush saw. After the second or third growing season, we'll keep, and that's just a 1 to 2 foot radius around each planted seedling, just to let they grow with the competition that no doubt will come back. And then cone maintenance, watching that, making sure they're doing their job. And as we do with all our plantations, we monitor plantation survival on a couple-year basis. So I think that's it. I guess time for questions.
Thank you, Nate. I do have a question from here in Cloquet, and we'll welcome folks to submit them from other places through the chat pod. For the shearing example, why was 80% of the sheared area desired to be slash-free, and why was the waste pushed into islands or along edges?
Yeah, we just knew that not everything was going to get done, especially with a KG blade. When you're dealing with those, we didn't want windrows is what we were after. We wanted them to be up along the edge. We wanted to be able to plant in that area, and it creates, when you do that, when you push it up along the edges, you have more area for browse, and the moose browse that we're after. So when it comes back, you've got more of the brush.
Nate, I have another question just for clarification. On your previous slide, you said, yeah, kind of worked, kind of didn't, and I think you maybe quickly said that you would use a straight shearing blade next time. Were you saying that the treatment overall kind of worked? You know, are you saying that you might not do this kind of treatment again, or simply that you would use a different type of equipment? And can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was talking about the blade that they used. The overall treatment worked. The contractor really had to work hard to get what we wanted, and with a straighter blade in our situation, probably would have worked better. Perhaps in some other area with a different site condition, a KG blade would have worked just fine. They do work. We've seen them work very nicely on different situations.
Okay, next question, Nate. What was the acreage of the site treated? How much of this have you done?
Yeah, last year was a big year for us. I think we did 900 acres, and it was mainly in that Claire Nelson Memorial Forest that I had outlined there. So it was a big planting year and a big shear year. It was a big deal.
Okay, Nate, thank you very much. I'm going to open it up now for a couple of questions for Ron that I've got stacked up in the chat pod here. We'll encourage folks, if you've got questions here in Cloquet, just raise your hand, let me know. Others, go ahead and submit them online. So Ron, you'll need to click your mic back on to answer this, but, where are we here? First, would reintroducing the wolf hunt control wolves enough to increase the moose population? That's the first question. I'll give you a second one right now too. When will moose collaring resume? So again, would reintroducing the wolf hunt control wolves enough to increase the moose population? And then when will moose collaring resume?
Yeah, and so a couple thoughts on that. In terms of reintroducing the wolf hunt, obviously until you get delisted again, there was that court decision earlier this year in Michigan that resulted in being protected again, so we can't have a hunt until they're delisted. It's one of those things that this population model will actually look at how much wolves are actually consuming, and I'm probably in the next 2 to 3 months I can give a numerical answer to that. My qualitative answer is that one of the other things that we saw the stabilization of the moose population here over the last 3 to 4 years, and that was after we had those 3 years of wolf harvest. And granted, that was across the entire, but we definitely had wolves taken in northeastern Minnesota, and it's something that both the DNR, which would be charged with managing wolves, and I think the people in Minnesota would have to, and the deer hunters as well, would have to say, you know, how many wolves do we really want to have as a target population? And could we, for example, manage them lower for a while until the moose recover? The second question about moose collaring resume, well, that was a governor's order, and there's no indication right now that that would be reversed. And one of the things I didn't say, you know, like on the calf work that Glenn Delgerdes and Bill Seaverwood are doing, you can kind of start to learn the pattern after a couple of years, but we've all seen changes in the weather and that kind of thing. That, you know, is that pattern going to persist over a longer time? And so they are getting some similar data. There's just no calf collaring right now, and he also said, the governor said, no adult collaring, so not for the foreseeable future. But the survey is going to continue.
Okay. Ron, are you using GPS collar data to, this is kind of a question for both of you, I suppose, but maybe Ron, are you using GPS collar data to test and see if or how moose are using the treated areas that Nate just described?
Yeah, well, I'll answer quickly and then Nate can answer. Nate asked me about that yesterday and I couldn't pull anything together in time. And part of the issue is that we've had fewer moose collared over the last year. But we are seeing, like Nate said, we're actually measuring some of these sites, and so we don't have collar data, but we do have measurements of browse on some of these treated sites.
Nate, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, and like I said, anecdotally, we see moose in this area, and I tell people if they want to see a moose, that's the road to drive down. So I can't say if it's worked, if it's helped, but there are definitely moose in that area.
All right. Next question is from Boulder Lake Environmental Learning Center. Where do you get the cone mesh browse protection for seedlings?
Yeah, and I'm glad I saw that question in the comment because I was able to look it up while we were talking, and it's Summit Environmental Group, and they're out of Toledo, Ohio. It's a product that this guy has developed just for browse protection, and he sells it all over the country. So far we like it, and it seems to be working.
All right. So the cones are nice, but what's the next step? Is the question here from Cloquet, after the cedar outgrow those cones and mesh?
Yeah, I guess we haven't really thought about that. We're just, hopefully we say good luck, and there'll be enough of them in there. I think cedar, once it gets a certain height, I think it'll do okay. And you know, there's not that many deer in this area, so winter browse isn't an issue. But you know, with cedar it's hard. So probably the best we can do is say good luck.
All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, we do have one more. Yeah, go ahead.
One, it was mentioned that habitat was part of the reason for the moose decline, but he didn't say specifically what about habitat is lacking. And the other question was, there's a lot of people doing brush management now for woodcock, sharp-tailed grouse, golden warblers. Is there any part of that that could help with moose too? Is there more bang for the buck in that project?
Okay. I'm assuming you could not hear that question. Is that right?
No, I didn't hear
Okay.
anything.
First question, I think it's for Ron. Ron, you mentioned that habitat changes have impacted the moose population, and the question was, can you elaborate on that and talk specifically about what habitat elements might be missing? And the second is there's been a lot of attention paid to managing brushlands for sharp-tailed grouse and other species, and do you see any opportunities there to sort of jointly manage for those species and also benefit the moose? I hope I got that right.
Okay. Okay. So I did the habitat changes. What I was talking about there was the general pattern of kind of reduced forest harvest. If you look at the percent of land in the northeastern Minnesota, in its northeastern moose range especially, that is in younger forests, that declined along about the same time as this moose decline has occurred. In one of the things that, like for example, in the 1970s, there was the big fire that Tomahawk burn, I think it was, that went through. Moose immediately responded to that, and there was more moose at that time than there are now. We're seeing a slower response now, but we are seeing, for example, in the survey plots, there was one survey plot last year that had about 50 moose in it, which is exceptionally high. And the question is that pattern occurring all along the southern edge of those fires? Pagami Creek is a little bit too quick, actually, but the Cavity Lake and Ham Lake fires. And so that's the a potential moose area. The second question?
There's been there's been some brushland management focused on sharp-tailed grouse and other species. Do you see any opportunities to combine those initiatives with the kind of management we've heard about today to benefit moose?
I think one of the things there is that, like, we're focusing on a northeastern population right now, and most of that, to my knowledge at least, has been more further west. So it's not in the primary, what we're calling right now the primary moose range. If we can get the northwestern moose population to increase and become a management goal, and I think that's got to happen after the northeast, then I can certainly see the potential for that.
Okay. Next question is, what about harvesting more deer in areas where moose are present?
Yeah, and that's actually something the DNR is looking at. The deer level is being managed at a level low enough so that they should not affect moose significantly. and that's based on work that's been done over the decades. It's kind of a rule of thumb. There's also been using the DNR is doing new deer management goal revisions. And one of the things that they have heard is that people want more deer. So in that area, so that's going to be something that has to be worked out in the future. I think getting deer will help, but part of that is going to be controlled by the severe winters too.
Okay, I do have a couple more questions, but I want to acknowledge the time. We're now a minute or two after 1 o'clock, and some of you may need to move on. So I think the main part of our program is now done. I do have a couple more questions, and Ron, I know you had some commitments beforehand. Do you need to get moving now as well? Did you have something afterwards too?
Well, I guess if you have questions, let me just go and make sure the class is going, and then I can come back. Because that started at 1. But if there's more for me, I can certainly come back.
Well, we do have a couple more for you, but you got to teach a class. I think maybe we'll. Why don't I let you go, Ron, and we will communicate these questions to you, and I'll make sure that they get back by email to the people who asked them, and maybe we can include something in our closing message, in our follow-up email as well.
Okay.
So with that, I think I'm going to draw us to a close. We had 2 excellent presentations. I want to thank Ron Moen and Nate Eide both for taking the time to join us and share that. I really like the mix of research and actual implementation of that research on the ground. And it's cool to hear that it's made a difference in terms of moose population kind of observations, at least early on. So that was great. Something else that I wanted to say, and I forgot what it was. So we'll leave it at that. We'll follow up by email. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us.
Okay, sounds good.